Hello. In this lab, we'll be controlling access in Kubernetes with the help of role-based access control. So, why do we require role-based access control? First question is that why do we need that in Kubernetes? So, we know that in a big organization or in big working space, we have multiple users and multiple clients. So, to make an automated process to assign these users and this client access according to their needs. That is, one user or client can only read a particular data in a present in a pod or can only see logs present in a configuration file. Then we have to provide access according to that because some person will need only read access so that it can read data from there and can use that data for a particular task but cannot write or make changes in that task. So for this type of scenario we will need role based access control. Also we have seen in Kubernetes best practices that role based access control is very essential in security practices so that our Kubernetes will remain secure. So it has very much importance in our Kubernetes cluster. So we will be learning this how we can control access in Kubernetes with the help of role-based access control. And we have seen that how it is very useful in the Kubernetes cluster. Now, in this question scenario, we are given an organization B box. Now, suppose that I am working for an organization which is big box, which has many clients, means it has many clients and user, and one of its user is dev user, and we have to provide access to this dev user only to read data, means it can read only pod data and configuration file but cannot make changes to that. So this is our task that we have to provide this dev user and access to only read pod data and read configuration file but cannot read beyond that, means can read or list pod data but cannot make changes to that or delete any pod or cluster. So for that what we'll be doing, this step will be broken down into two steps. First we will be creating a role. It is same as we can see that first we'll be creating a role, then bind that role to the dev user. It is similar to what we have seen in a computer system in Windows. When we assign a role in Windows, that is first we assign role to a user, that is it can access only this much of apps, and then we assign a user to which these roles apply. So it is similar to that. First we'll be creating a role in which we will be mentioning what this role will be doing and what access it will be providing. So like read access to which read access, there will be mentioning file, which file it can read, and in which namespace and folder it can apply on. And then we will be binding role, that is to which user this apply. So here we will be mentioning dev user, and which role, here we will be mentioning the role we have created in the first step. Now in this scenario we will apply this role on a bbox mobile namespace. We have seen what is namespace. Namespace is a virtual subcluster. Now it is our client, it will not be using our full cluster, means we are a big company, bbox company is a big company, so it has many clients. So it has divided its big cluster into many subcluster, which we have seen that what is subcluster. Like if I search what is namespace, so namespace are way to organize cluster into virtual subcluster. So we have seen this into Kubernetes videos also. So it has divided a cluster into some small part of cluster, virtual subcluster. So dev user is only using this much of data in our subcluster. So we have to provide access to only this much folder. We can see this as a folder, that is dev user can access only data present in this folder and can read data in this folder, not of other clients which are using other cluster in our big cluster. So we have created a virtual subcluster in cluster and can only provide access to this much of cluster and this much of pod data, not whole cluster data to the dev user. So this is our task. Now we will be implementing this task and taking a brief overview what we will be doing in this step. We can also see here that your developer frequently asks that information and you have to provide read data from the cluster but cannot make any changes. So we have to provide read data of what? Pod metadata and container logs. So this is our task scenario in this lab. So first of all, we will be checking what access is provided to our dev users. So when we run this command to get pods, so they will get an error message because we have not provided any access at initial phase to the dev user. Now we will create a role. This is our first step that we can see. We will create a role where we will be mentioning what dev user, what this role can access and on which it applies to. So we'll create a role. Kind means what type of thing we are creating. It is type of thing of role configuration file. And here we'll be mentioning name of the file, which is pod reader. We can see that. And namespace. Namespace is bbox mobile. We have mentioned it only apply to bbox mobile. This role only apply to bbox mobile, not outside the bbox mobile. And here we'll be mentioning resources, on which resources it apply to pods and pods logs. That is, it can only access pod metadata and container logs. And now verbs, which things it can get access, means it can read, it can make changes, or what it can do. Verbs means what it can apply on this data present in this namespace bbox mobile, that is pod and pod logs. So it can only get, watch, or list content in that folder, not make any changes on that folder. That we have seen that we have to only read data from the cluster but cannot make changes present in the namespace box mobile. So this is the code we have mentioned, and paste that code in the file we have created and apply these changes. Now our role is created. Now our next step is to bind this role to the dev user. So for that we'll be creating a kind of role binding. Earlier we have created kind role, means role type of file we are creating. Here we are creating kind role binding because we are binding role. So if we take a simple scenario, so what we will be needing: first subject to which this role apply, and role reference, which role does this apply. So first in metadata we'll mention things about role binding, that is its name is pod reader, and on which it apply to bbox mobile namespace. Now, in subject, we will mention user of developer name. Here, developer user this role apply to, and in role reference, we will mention role pod reader. But one thing to notice here, the role binding name is pod reader, and the role reference name is also pod reader. So, doesn't the Kubernetes confuse? No, it will not confuse, because here all, unless the name is same but kind is different. Here the kind is role, which we have mentioned earlier. Kind role name pod reader. Here we have mentioned kind role binding and name pod reader. So they are different. Also we can see that name is same but the kind is different. That's why it will not affect and confuse the Kubernetes, because the kind is different. If kind and role is same, then it will give error, but here kind is different. That's why it is not confused. So here we have mentioned subject, which is dev user, and we have mentioned here the role which we are created earlier, that it can only get, watch, list the content of pod data and pod log files. Then we apply these roles, and when we try to access this time the list of pod, then we can see the list of pods. We can see the logs file, because we have provided the resources location of log file also, and it can list, watch, or get only data. But when we try to make any changes, that is delete pod or anything, that then we will get an error message. So this is our lab purpose, that we have to provide only read access and get or list access, but cannot make any changes. And on which resources it will apply to? It will apply to pods and pods log data, not data outside that. And on which namespace? Bbox mobile namespace. So for this lab, it is all we have to do, and we can apply a similar type of scenario for all the type of role that we have to create. That is, we have to create a multiple roles for our particular different kind of users and particular kind of clients. So we can create that and can bind different type of person here in subject, that is dev user or jane user. We can see the similar type of code in kubernetes.io also, that they have created first the kind role and provided the namespace and name of the role, that is pod reader, and created the resources which the person can get access and get watch list. And they will bind the this role to a user, means they have binded to the Jane user. So the similar kind of code we have used here, and bind the role to the dev user, so that it can only read metadata and container logs. So that's all for this lab. And we have seen also that why this role based access control is important when we have to automate our process, and for security purposes, that we have also seen in Kubernetes best practices. So that's all for the lab. Thank you.